We're missing somebody.
Okay, well, they better stop missing.
No, hi, yes, the bear.
Okay. Trans and intransitive. We're going to do a little bit of a review from last week on that because I kind of feel like some people they didn't quite get the transitive versus intransitive verbs, and it's because I was rushing at the end. Okay? So, transitive and intransitive specifically speaks to transferring the action of a verb. Okay? So, every verb is, you guys understand what a verb is, right? Give me an example of a verb.
No.
Running.
Running. Give me another example.
Jumping.
Fighting, jumping, more. Keep them coming.
Hitting.
Smacking. Good. Okay, so when you have a verb, we actually have two different kinds of verbs. There are action verbs, and there's another kind of verb. Who knows what it was?
Linking verb.
There we go. Linking verb. Okay. Okay, so yes, there are helping verbs too. I mean, that's kind of like helping verb.
I meant linking
but
verb.
it's different. We'll come back to that. So, action verbs or linking verbs. The key is that this is really deep, so pay attention. Action verbs have something called action. Okay? More importantly, Tice, linking verbs do not have action. Okay, that's the key. I'm talking to both of you. A linking verb does not have action. Can somebody give me an example of a verb that has no action?
Is.
Yes, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
Good. So we say David is cool. Okay? I know. So this does not have an action, but if I said David eats pizza, this has an action. That's the difference here, okay? Yes.
I like to point out that David is genre, you mean.
David is what?
Genre.
Genre. Hey! We learned this last week. Correction.
Excelente, amigo. Okay, so that's action. Now, what happens when we have action? All of a sudden, we have a sentence like, what was he using? When we have action, there is a verb here, and that action is being done usually to something. Okay? In this case, pizza is an object. It's a noun, right? So it's an object. And it's receiving the action of eating. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so if David eats, something's being eaten, what is the object that receives the action of eating? Pizza. Okay, two things here. We want to talk about what that means for this verb and what that means for this object. This object, when the object is the thing the action is being done to, it's called a direct object. Okay, so subject does the action, it does the verb. Okay, the direct object receives the action of the verb. And so now you can see if the direct object, like pizza, receives the action of the verb, that means you can never ever have a direct object from a linking verb because there's no action, and direct objects require action. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
That's important for direct objects, and we will come to indirect objects later. Secondly, what does it mean for this verb? Well, it means that there's two kinds of verbs that are action. It means there is transitive and not transitive, which is intransitive. Okay? Transitive means that the action of the action verb is being done to something. It's transferring the action. Now, intransitive doesn't mean not action. It doesn't say in action. So these verbs, intransitive, are still action verbs, but they are not transferring the action anywhere. So an example of that would be instead of David eats pizza, David eats. So let me ask you, does that action verb have action?
Yeah.
Does it have an object?
No.
Correct. So this is intransitive. Does that make sense now to everybody? Transitive versus intransitive?
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Gavin? Anybody? Okay, cool. All right, that's transitive and intransitive. Man, this thing is like a dream. Wow. All right. So, transitive versus intransitive. Next, linking verbs. Let's talk about linking verbs. What do we mean by linking verb? Well, a linking verb is...
Links the verb and the subject together.
Well, very close. It does link something. Let's
The
say
noun.
David
Oh, the object.
is genre.
No.
Okay, so this is a linking verb. Okay, what exactly is it linking? Ty said the subject and the verb. It is linking the subject, but not with
The
the verb.
direct object.
Okay, very close. But we said a linking verb can never have a direct object. And let me ask you another question: is genre, in this case, it means cool, right? Is genre an object? Let's change this just so we don't get confused here. Is I know we can come back to it. But I was about to ask, is genre a noun? And technically it is a noun. But it's not being used as a noun. So, is cool a noun?
No.
Okay, so it can't be a direct object, because to be a direct object, it has to be a noun, right?
Yeah.
So is it an indirect object?
Okay, is an indirect object still an object?
Yeah.
So then it can't be that either. So think of this. Is this a noun?
No.
What is it?
An adjective?
An adjective describing what?
The noun.
What noun?
Subject.
The subject, exactly. When you have an adjective describe, well, adjectives, all adjectives modify nouns, right?
Yeah.
Like cool, the cool dude. Okay? Cool and the are both adjectives that modify this noun, dude. Okay? So what do we do when the adjective is modifying a noun, but the noun is on the other side of this verb subject division? What do we call this side? This is called the
Subject.
What do we call this side?
Predicate.
Predicate. Exactly. When the adjective is in the predicate, but is describing the subject, that is called a predicate adjective. I'm going to put PA for predicate adjective. Okay? We're going to come back to predicate adjective as well as predicate nominative, which is basically a predicate noun. We'll come back to that. But the important thing is that it is describing the subject. So if you think about it, basically what you're saying is the subject is equal to this. Whatever this is. In this sense, you're saying that David equals cool, right? Now, in math, in algebra, or even just addition, 1 plus 1 equals 2. And everything on both sides of the equal is 100% equated, right? There's no difference. That's not what we're saying here. Obviously, cool does not describe everything that David is. It doesn't describe his muscles. It doesn't describe his brains. It doesn't describe like his good-natured heart. It only describes the cool factor, right? So when we say equals here, when I say that the is of the verb is like an equals, I don't mean in every sense, because there's a whole lot going on with David that just cool doesn't really grasp, right? So
You realize you don't have any muscles. You
Well, he
look
has more than you.
Yeah, because I'm 12, he's 34.
okay, yeah, well, I'm just fat, I guess.
I mean, you're not lying to that.
Okay, so don't think that when I put an equal sign, I mean 100%. What I mean is that in some sense, the subject is equated to the other thing on that side. And whether it's an adjective like cool or a noun. David is, there's our equal sign, a guy. And you can't argue with that, Tyson. Okay? So, and now instead of an adjective, we have a noun. But still, what you're saying is this thing is this thing. That makes sense?
Yeah.
In other words, you are linking the two. The verb is linking the subject with the predicate. That's why it's called a linking verb. Does everybody understand that?
Okay. Makes sense.
Question about this? Or are you going to make a joke? Okay, cool. Moving on. Okay, no question about linking verbs. Okay, let's talk about phrases versus clauses. How many of you have heard the term clause?
I've heard it.
Heard it? Have you heard phrase?
Yeah.
What is a phrase? Somebody tell me what a phrase is.
Sentence.
Raise your hand.
That can't be a sentence.
It's a what?
It's like a group of words and it can have a verb or noun, but it can't have both. It can be a sentence.
Yes.
Like part of a
That's exactly right. I was wondering if you guys were going to be like, well, it's a group of words, right? Anything could be a phrase, right? Oh, that's a catchphrase, this or that. But when we say phrase in grammar, what I mean is what she said. Specifically, a group of words that cannot be a sentence on its own, okay? So now, it's a little more detailed than that, but it's pretty specific when I say phrase. So let's talk about clause versus phrase. Clause is not Santa Claus. Okay? It's a clause is another term for a group of words, but specifically, there are two kinds of clauses. So we'll talk about the two in a moment. But every clause, no matter which kind it is, one of the two, every clause always has a subject and a verb, no matter what. Okay? Every clause always has a subject and a verb. Write that down. Okay, so there's two kinds of clauses. We have independent clause and dependent clause. Some people call dependent clauses subordinate clauses. In other words, they come in underneath, right? Subordinate. They are underneath and they depend on something else, which is why they're called dependent clauses. They depend on something. Does something dependent depend on something else? Yeah, if it's dependent, it's depending on something else. If it's depending on something, can that thing has to be independent, right? In order for my wife to depend on me, I have to be strong enough to be independent, right? Not independent of her in that sense, but the point is that I have to bear the weight on myself. I have to be able to bear the weight of the family, or she can't depend on me. In order for a dependent clause to be valid, it has to rely on an independent clause. Okay? Now, what's the difference between these? We said that both clauses, no matter what they are, always have a subject and a verb. So let's start with that. Subject and verb is in every clause. So what's the difference? The difference is that an independent clause has what I call a complete thought. A complete thought. So let me put two sentences up on the board and you can tell me which one you think is a complete thought. Okay. Which of these sentences has a complete thought?
I teach English.
I teach English. This one. Okay, does that one have a subject?
Yes.
What is it? Right, I. What's the verb?
Teach.
Teach. Okay, and how do you know it has a complete thought?
Makes sense.
Exactly, because it's literally a complete thought, right? It is a thought that finishes out the thought so that it makes sense on its own, right? What about the next one? When I teach English, isn't that the same thing?
No.
Why not? What's the subject?
The subject is still I.
What's the verb?
Teach.
Okay, so I literally have the same thing in here. What's different?
It doesn't make sense.
It needs more to complete it.
That's it. What you mean is true, but what you said is not. Okay?
Wow.
Yes, you're right. It doesn't make sense on its own in the sense that it doesn't have a finished thought. But it does make sense. Like, you understand, when I teach English, that makes sense. It's just that you're waiting for something, right? Okay, that is lacking a complete thought. This is the difference between an independent clause that can be independent. You can put a period here, and it can be by itself. I teach English. That can be by itself. But when I teach English depends on another clause that has to be independent. So, who wants to offer a suggestion? What would you put here to create a complete thought?
For example, you can say, when I teach English, Tice always bugs me.
Okay.
Yeah. Valid.
Me. Now, what's the subject, Tice, of this here?
Tice,
Correct. What's the verb?
bugs,
Yes. And what is the direct object? Correct. That's not ironic. It's just that you are the one bugging, and you said that you bug you, but it was me. So. Okay, let me ask you: is this here what we just added? Tice bug me. Is that a sentence?
Yes.
No.
No, it's. Sorry.
This is the sentence. Okay, so here's the thing: an independent clause can be independent, which means it can be a sentence on its own, but it doesn't mean every independent clause is a sentence, because you might have a dependent clause added on that creates a sentence. Okay, in other words, every sentence must have a complete thought, but not every independent clause is a sentence by itself. Okay? You can have an independent clause and a dependent clause. You can have 2, 3 independent clauses. 3 independent clauses, all 3 together. They could be independent, but they're not, and still be all in the same sentence. Okay? But the key is whether or not the clause, the group of words that has a subject and a verb, right? Every clause has a subject and a verb. Does the group of words with a subject and verb make sense by itself, independent, or does it not make sense by itself and depend on another clause in the sentence that does make sense by itself?
Can there be like a sentence that have 2 dependent clauses?
Yes, absolutely. So let's come back to this. Now that we've got a good understanding of clauses and dependent versus independent, let's take a moment to talk about phrases, because phrases can show up and you might think, oh, that's a dependent clause because it can't be by itself, but it's actually a phrase, not a clause. Okay? So here's an example. Yeah, I don't know. When teaching English, I yell.
Please don't.
Why? Okay, what's the subject of this sentence? I. What's the verb? Is there another verb?
Teaching.
Okay. What's the subject of this verb? Because remember, a clause always has 2 things. What are they, Gavin?
English.
Yes, a clause always has English, in English. But what does a clause always have? It has 2 things.
Subject and verb.
Yes. Okay, what's the subject of this verb?
English.
English? Is English doing the teaching? No.
Would it be like a invisible I between when and teaching?
Well, let's try it. When I teaching English. Does that make sense? When I
Yeah.
teaching?
It makes sense, but it doesn't because it's not complete.
What's missing? How would you fix it? Let's say this was the sentence. When I what? Am. Okay, so what you just did was you added a verb. Why did we have to add a verb? We had a verb.
Well, the am's a linking verb.
But it's still completing this verb. So my point is, this here doesn't have a subject. But does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Why? Because it's not a clause. Okay? This is a clause. I yell. That has a subject and a verb and a complete thought. It may only be 2 words, but it still has all 3. Right? I yell. 2 words. Jesus wept. 2 words, complete thought. Subject, verb. Jesus wept. Subject, verb. Right? This, though, even though it has a verb, remember what Lily said. What is a phrase? It's a group of words that may have a verb, she said, but it doesn't have a subject and a verb. This is a phrase, not a clause. It is not a dependent clause. Does that make sense, Isaac?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so here's what you guys need to do. When you look at a sentence, you have to first find out where are all the subjects and verbs. If you can section off a sentence and you know, okay, here's a subject and its verb. Here's another subject and that verb. Here's a compound subject. 2 people, 2 nouns, doing 1 verb. Here's a verb and the subject, but there's no complete thought. Oh, here's another verb, but there's no subject. Then you are able to differentiate between a phrase and a dependent clause. Because sometimes people think this is a dependent clause. Because they're like, well, when teaching English can't be by itself, so it's not independent. And so then they think it's a dependent clause, but there's no subject. You got to be careful of that. Does everybody understand that? Okay, cool. So that's phrases. Phrases are a group of words. If you didn't write this down, write it down. Phrases are a group of words that may or may not have a subject or verb, but won't have both. Okay. You wanted to know, can a sentence have multiple dependent clauses? Yes, it can. Let's go to Max. Okay, can I get 3 volunteers? I saw those 2 hands and Lily. I think are the 3 that I saw. I have 1 marker. Oh, here's another marker. Here's 2 markers. Tice, you take the first one. Sentence. I want you to mark subject, verb, and direct objects.
Which one is the first?
The one on top.
The one that says your name.
Oh, this one. Okay. Yeah. Get the one with my name.
No.
Okay.
No,
Get the first one on the very top.
You might just have to wait, okay? So, Tice, you do the first sentence. Yep. Lily, you do the second one. I want each of you to mark every subject and verb and direct object in your sentence.
That's a lot.
You got it.
What was I supposed to do again?
Mark every subject and verb and object in your sentence.
He might. Who knows?
So you first, Tyson. Your sentence is the top one.
Like,
Let him do it.
Just look for the subject first, Tyson.
this is a
Okay?
deep thought.
What word is the subject? Good. And what word is the verb? And what word is the direct object? Boom. Dunzo the bunzo.
Hey.
You done?
Yeah. Good job. And now do objects. Or if you think you're done, then you can just call it. Oh, you got one. Sorry. Go ahead. Lily, I mean, I'm not telling you to be done.
Oh.
You can be done if you think you're done. Sure. We can talk about it when you sit down.
Sure. I do not see the board, but why not?
Why not?
Looks done to me.
All right, your turn, buddy. What's your name again?
Stetson.
Stetson Maxwell? And what's your other brother's name?
Colton?
Colton. Stetson.
So we'd have subject. This is a verb.
So you mark the verb. There's got to be a subject, usually, right? Or is that in a phrase?
Good question.
The verb here. Does that have a subject? Is there something doing the ising?
It would be the subject.
Okay. Are there any other verbs and subjects?
I don't know the answer. I just work here. Come on, Stetson.
That's what Grayson would say.
All right, you can sub in Maxwell if you want.
Okay, Max, if you think I got it, where's the direct option?
Listen.
Listen, I don't have anything to say.
I don't know the answer. I just work here.
Exactly.
Let's see.
Wait, what? I thought you
We all work here. It's the Lord's work.
Party.
Anybody want to offer some advice?
Party.
I don't have any advice to offer. I'm sorry.
Okay, there's one more verb.
So one more verb.
Pizza and soda are.
But it's so great.
Oh,
Great is not a
I
verb yet.
think that might be. Let's see. Have.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, I was right. Yay!
And who's doing the having? There you go. Okay, Isaac, come on up.
Oh. I'm coming. More for you.
Maxwell, come on up.
Okay.
Hey, look at this. Are these like wikis? Those wax sticks? These things are awesome whenever they're.
All right, Maxwell and Isaac.
Oh, thank you.
Isaac, you're gonna take the third sentence. Okay? And I want you to put brackets. So, you know, if you ever have
I'll
a
take the first
parent, you can take the first two. What I want you to do is put brackets like this around and then put clause 1 or clause 2, however many clauses there are around in your sentence.
Alright, who
Okay?
goes first?
Either one of us.
Oh, is that nice?
You go first. I'll just look my sentence.
So I want you to put a bracket around the whole clause for each clause.
Okay, wait.
And there can be multiple clauses in the sentence.
So what's the clause?
It always has a subject and verb.
Right. And an independent clause has a complete thought. So even if the thought is not complete, what are the boundaries of that thought? Even if that thought is incomplete. Okay? Yes, that's correct. That's what I'm looking for.
Good job. Six?
Yeah, it's a backwards 6.
Yeah.
That's a 2.
That's a 2.
That's backwards 6.
Oh.
Here's a right.
issue.
Oh boy, it is.
Hang on.
Okay, good. And what about the first sentence?
Oh, this it's just a song.
Great job. Give Maxwell a round of applause.
Maxwell, he
Can I
finally
sit down now?
You may.
Because I want to go home now. It's been a hard day, 8 hours of work done.
Clause 1.
It's just too simple. I think I might be wrong with that.
Yeah.
Excellent. You got it right. So here's what I want you guys to understand.
Isaac, just so
You can have as many clauses as you want in a sentence. You can have independent and dependent clauses, okay? So there's a couple things. We're going to talk about how to separate the different clauses with punctuation. When do you put a comma? When do you put a conjunction like the word and? Those things, okay? But first, I want you to understand 4 sentence types, okay? Based on clauses. We have a simple sentence. Simple sentence is number 1. And it is one independent clause. And that's it. There's only one clause, and it's always independent because you can't have a dependent clause by itself, right? Okay? So a simple sentence only has one clause, and it's always independent. That's like this one here. I eat pizza. That is a simple sentence, not because it's short, but because it only has one clause. So think about it like this. You could have a sentence like, all-time
Favorite thing in the world.
favorite pastime to do every year. Is that a simple sentence?
Not really.
The answer is yes. There's only one subject.
No. Okay.
Every eating pizza is the subject. That is doing the action of the verb is. And then the rest of this is the predicate. It is what? It is my pastime. And what is the rest of this? My pastime. All favorite pastime. All time is modifying favorite. And then to do every year is a verb phrase, but it is modifying the pastime. So there's actually only one subject and verb. Even though it looks super complicated, it's still a simple sentence because the definition is one independent clause. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Simple sentence might not look simple, but it's called simple based on the clauses. I tried to make it super unsimple. Okay, second one is a compound sentence. Who knows what the word compound means?
Multiple put together?
Multiple of the same thing, right? So compound interest is when you have who would want to have a penny doubled every day?
Yeah.
Right? You'd have like 30, I think it's $30 million at the end of the month, right?
Dang.
Yeah.
That's
If you
great.
just double every time, and you're never changing, it's never double, then triple, then quadruple. It's always double. It's more of the same. That's what compound means. Okay, so compound sentence is 2 or more independent clauses. But still notice there's no dependent clauses. And there's at least 2. So it's compound, there's multiple, but it could be 5, it could be 10. It would be a really bad sentence if there were 10 clauses. It'd be like the Apostle Paul. He has like huge, long diatribes. Anyway, number 3 is complex. Complex, the idea of complex means multiple of different things, right? If something is complex, it has different parts to it, okay? Complex sentences only have one independent clause. One independent clause plus one or more dependent clauses. Now, it could have two, but it might not have two dependent clauses. It might only have one. But even if it only has one independent and one dependent, you still have different parts, and it is therefore called complex. Anybody want to guess what the fourth kind is? Sentences of the fourth kind.
May the fourth be with you.
Compound complex.
Yes, compound complex.
What? And go ahead.
Compound complex sentences are when you have, notice that all three of these options, you either have one independent or two independent and no dependent. Compound complex is putting these together when you have two or more independent and one or more dependent. Okay?
I need to write that down.
Yeah,
Just
go
say
ahead,
that.
take a second, write it down.
Say it again.
Sure. Simple is one independent clause.
Yeah.
Compound is two or more, two plus independent clause. Complex is only one independent clause and one or more dependent clause. Compound complex is at least two independent clauses or more, so two or more independent and one or more dependent. Are there any questions on that? Okay, can I erase it, or are you still copying?
I'm still copying.
Two more independent clauses and at least one dependent.
Yep, and one or more. Yep. You can have more, but if you have like two independent clauses and five dependent clauses, it's still compound complex. Because compound refers to multiple independent. Okay, can I erase it? Well, here, I'll leave the bottom portion. All right, so what about separating these clauses? How do you know when to separate them? Well, here's the basic part. A comma separates the dependent and independent, okay? And if we're just talking about commas and it's only by itself, then here's an example. When I eat food, I get full. Notice here we have a clause here, and it's independent, or I'm sorry, it's dependent. When I eat food is not a complete thought. But then this portion, I get full, it is a complete thought. And what is separating them? Only a comma, okay? That's all you need in between a dependent and an independent clause if the dependent clause comes first. But what if I switch them? I get full when I eat. Same clauses. I get full when I eat.
I'm so sorry, guys.
So you only need the comma when the dependent clause comes first. Okay? Now there's going to be some like variations and some like times that this will change, but to just get started on commas, this is the first thing. The next thing is, what about when you have two independent, like a compound sentence, right? At least two independent clauses. What do you need to separate those? Let's put an example on the board.
Would it be linking verbs? That separate them?
Good question, or a good suggestion, because they link, but that's not what they link.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thingamajiggy with the
Yeah.
dot and the comma.
Semicolon?
Semicolon. There's multiple ways to.
Dot and dot.
Yeah. Or colon.
Man, you are
That's my kind of vocabulary right there. Thingamajig, thingama what's it,
Okay,
whatever the heck
let's
that
put
is.
2 independent clauses on the board and then see how they go. Let's see.
Uh-oh. You're on the board, Spencer.
No. You haven't read what I wrote.
Hey.
Okay, Stetson eats pizza, he throws up.
Oh,
Tell me.
my goodness.
Notice we have a subject and a verb, okay? They are both clauses because they both have subject and verb. Are they both independent? Are they both have a complete thought?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could they be by themselves? Like if we put a period here and a period here, would it make sense?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now, what if we don't want to put a period there? How do we join those?
A comma, semicolon.
Or
Okay, so let's start with that.
Or you can put
Stetson eats pizza, comma, he throws up. Is this correct?
No.
No.
No. No, it's not. Not as it is. Okay,
Yeah.
here's the thing. This is called a comma splice. Think of a comma as a knife. And when the comma is cutting the sentence in half in a way it shouldn't be, that is called a comma splice. Now, a moment ago, we had a dependent clause, comma independent. And it was good. That's okay because it was a dependent clause. But a comma splice is when it incorrectly separates a sentence. In this case, because it's 2 independent. So, Tice, we need something else here. What did you suggest? And. Okay, good. Now, anybody know what kind of word the word and is called?
A verb.
Nope.
Conjunction.
Yes, conjunction. Okay, there are 7 main conjunctions these are called coordinating conjunctions because this conjunction right here is coordinating this portion with this portion. Okay? So these are called coordinating conjunctions. Who knows what they are? I call them fanboys because each of these letters represent one of the conjunctions.
I know and button or. That's all I know.
And
Or can say up.
Okay, here it is.
Would the N be nor?
Yes. Nor. What else?
Or but?
Yeah, you said but.
For.
Yep.
It's
Yet.
4 in the front is 4.
Yet.
For. Yet.
Still?
Nope.
So.
Yes. Okay, there we go. Everyone say that. For and nor but or yet so. Say
Or
it.
and nor but.
Or yet so. Say it again. For and nor but or yet so. Those are fanboys. You could put any one of those here. Let's try it. Stetson eats pizza. For he throws up. Okay. Stetson doesn't eat pizza, nor does he throw up, right? Stetson eats pizza, but he throws up. Okay? So a coordinating conjunction brings 2 independent clauses, but you have to have a comma with it. Okay? So that's our last point. Independent clauses, joining 2 independent clauses together requires, in this case, a comma fanboy in between. Okay? All right. Don't forget to read the next lesson before next week.
I don't read it. I didn't write it.
And then after you're done with that, for the next week, make sure you read the PDF on neighborosity. Okay? Has anyone started that short story?
I finished it.
Do you like it?
I loved it.
Wasn't it good?
It is so good.
Honestly,
story.
to me, it felt kind of random.
Okay.
It felt like it was just thrown into like the middle of a book. Thing, like,
It's one of my favorite stories.
It's good.
I like it.
He died very suddenly. It was very
Everybody's
sudden.
read it, Isaac.
It was so sudden. Like I kind of saw it coming, but it was like, dang, that was quick.
Yeah, but then it brings the family together. And